Welcome back to Bazaar. I'm Eco, and Season 3 has just seen its third hotfix. Let's get right into it. Subscraper has been fixed. If you didn't know, previously having a duplicate Subscraper with a new functionality would cause them to loop on each other infinitely and give all of your items infinite value. That obviously needed to be fixed. Moving on to Vanessa, Pig's receiving no other nerfs, thank God. He did not need any. There are a lot of items, Vanessa's got most of them, that previously had the text, under certain criteria, reduce this item's cooldown by a percentage. And all of those items have been changed to reduce this item's cooldown by a flat value that is equivalent to the old percentage. The reason this change is necessary is because in the old system, it was very easy to get any item like Submersible down to a 1 second cooldown because you would need much less cooldown reduction than you should to get it down to that number. So this is a much better system for the new cooldown system they have, and it's basically just fixing some outliers that were an oversight in the old patch. This is definitely a good change, and it does have big balance implications, but the builds that were really powerful because of this really weren't very common yet. They were being held down a lot by the more powerful things in the meta, but it would have been a problem in the future, so it's good to see this getting changed. Additionally, Vanessa's seeing another silencer nerf. It's getting absolutely brutalized out there. It is still absolutely worth running at higher tiers, but it's down 10% at all tiers from where it was a month ago. It has taken huge hits. Moving on to the Dooley items, Dinosaur is going up to 6 seconds in addition to the functionality change for its cooldown reduction. And that's a good nerf. Dinosaur is obviously out of control. It's not a huge nerf since it's pretty much always going to be enabled. It's only half a second slower, but you have to remember that the cooldown reduction is also going to be much less effective on it. So in the previous patch, if you saw somebody with a cooldown reduced Dinosaur that was like 1.6, 1.7 seconds, which I've seen stuff like that, I might have done stuff like that on video, I'm not quite sure. Those same dinosaurs are going to be like 2.7, 2.8 now. The cooldown reduction is going to be proportionally less effective, and their base cooldown is going to be longer. And I think this is the sort of light touch nerf that dinosaurs should see, and they might need more than this in the archetype, but dinosaur is by far the biggest problem right now, because essentially he would just pop off and solo your opponent before anyone really activated anything else. He was wildly out of line with anything else the archetype was doing, and I think this is a fair nerf for Dino Dooley. I still think it's very, very strong, but dinosaur stood out as the most impressive part of the archetype. I'm just going to be skipping past all these changes that are the cooldown reduction changes I talked about, where they're being changed to the new system of flat reduction instead of percentage reduction, and go straight to Mac items, which is the main thing that most people were waiting for this hotfix for. They wanted to see Freeze Mac get nerfed, and he's taken big, big nerfs. First, the huge one is every single one of his items that said, when you use a relic, charge this, now says, when you use an adjacent relic, charge this. So that makes it impossible to do the thing where you have like 5 relics on your board that all loop, right? You'd have Sands of Time and Blank Slate and one of the totems for the temple, and then you'd also have an earrings, and they'd all be charging each other, and you could essentially have 3 empty board slots, and the build would still be an instant infinite loop, right? So now it's going to be a lot more difficult to get those infinite loops. They still obviously charge each other, they're still fast, but they're less synergistic with Pendulum than they used to be. They're less blatantly strong than they used to be. This is going to be a big nerf to speed, and it's hard to really visualize how much slower they get until we get to play with it, but this is not a minor change. Next up, Blank Slate no longer scales its freeze with tier at all. It's just one target at all tiers. I don't know if you were aware of this, but in the previous patch, freeze could overwhelm Dooley's Scarf and Nullfrost Altar. You would send out so many freezes per global with Blank Slate on like a pendulum loop that they actually couldn't unfreeze fast enough, and you would freeze lock anti-freeze items. Blank Slate was the main culprit of this, so I would have preferred to see it get some sort of free scaling with tier and not literally no free scaling with tier, even if it's just like minuscule single target duration buffs. But like, it's a huge problem. What I would have preferred doesn't matter because I needed it to see some sort of nerf. I'm not going to be like super salty that like, oh, they could have left the freeze, but no, fuck the freeze. Even if I would have preferred to see to some degree a lighter touch on the freeze changes, I think the freeze was super problematic, and it's better to gut it than use too light of a touch considering the current state of the meta. So yeah, I'm sad to see it reduced all the way to 1 with no duration added, but I get it. It deserves it. Hopefully it can come back to some degree in the future if it turns out it's underperforming now. If it doesn't, then I'm just wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong. Moving on to the Frost Totem, as I said, they all had that change with only adjacent relics now. Its cooldown is back to its original launch cooldown, up a second from where it was on this patch. And most importantly, its freeze duration has been halved from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. And honestly, between both of these, I kind of feel like maybe we've gone too far in the other direction and freeze quest doesn't work anymore. Very seriously, I look at these two changes, I'm like, how do you use Frost Totem and Blank Slate now? I think the answer might be that Blank Slate's not really meant to be used in freeze builds, and Frost Totem is meant to be used for freeze synergy, but dude, they both look like they do not freeze much at all right now. And I really appreciate that. I would rather have this archetype obliterated for a patch and get a hotfix out and buff them back later. But I do look at this and think, like, does the build even function at all? I think this might be starving buzzard treatment. For those without the Hearthstone background, I started using the term starving buzzard treatment way back when Hearthstone nerfed starving buzzard, which was a card that costs 2 mana and drew you cards, by making it cost 5 mana and basically be unchanged. It turns out a 2 mana draw engine and a 5 mana draw engine, 150% more mana is fucking unplayable. You technically changed the card, but you may as well have removed it from the game. That's kind of how I feel when I see cooldown increase, charge condition more restrictive, effect halved, right? Like, Frost Totem was too good. I don't disagree with that. This feels like too much. And to be clear, still a great change. Absolutely don't want to see Freeze Mac on the ladder tomorrow. I'm glad they did this. But again, I really hope these cards comically underperform and get buffed up to some degree of usability. Because if we live in a world where these are good enough freeze cards for Mac to make a freeze build with them, then I don't understand the game at all. Like, I'm deeply confused if these cards perform well in their current state. I feel like the pendulum started more or less where it needed to be, then swung way too far and overpowered, then swung way too... Like, I think the original implementation, aside from the quest completion, was much closer to balance than this is. This is dead in the water. Maybe I'm wrong. I just don't look at these durations and these target numbers and think, oh yeah, these cards do things. But I don't think anyone cares. I think everyone's just like, oh, thank God they're not here today. I think we're all just happy not to see Freeze Mac, but this is not the way the cards should be. And maybe I'm wrong. There's this thought in my head, like, the devs know what they're doing. They consistently make good changes, and I've trusted them, and they've done great constantly. But at the same time, I look at this, I'm like, how could a good build rely on spending 4 items to do this little freeze? Or 4 spaces, I mean. Anyways, moving on from the absolutely gutting Freeze Mac nerfs, which will take it from, like, tier 0 meta defining to somebody please save us from the dino Dooleys, because the Ice Age has ended and the dinosaurs are back on the menu, boys. I think dino Dooley's just undisputed #1 in the next meta. Anyways, Magic Carpet and Spider Mace both gained the relic tag. I'm happy to see that. I actually had this thought while I was playing off camera. I was like, I wonder if the only reason Magic Carpet's not a relic is because it would be too good at charging your totems and like it make it too easy to navigate the mid game in a quest build out of weapons. Well, now it's a relic. Now we can see how it works. Coming down to the neutral changes, this is really the Mac changes extended because the Wardens were predominantly Mac items. These are the 3 of the legendaries from the Greenheart Expedition. Bar Spike is the Poison one, Blaze Howl is the Burn one, and Ice Watch obviously is the Freeze one. These 2 are largely symmetrical, received basically the same changes. Like Mac's other items, they only charge off of adjacent relics, and their scaling was halved from what it previously was. And frankly, I'm not really sure that these needed the nerf. In most Mac builds, I was like, these are probably worse than running library, but I may as well. Like, these are legendary items that already felt like they only worked in Mac. They've been gutted because of their synergy with an already gutted build. I expect these to perform terribly, man. I don't know that these needed to be targets for nerfs. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Like, the scaling change doesn't feel like it matters. It's still going to go off non-stop. Or it would if they hadn't been massively slowed down, because like if I only charge with adjacent relics, I'm not charging Blaze Howl or Barb Spike, right? That's crazy. Their main thing is passive anyway, right? I'm gonna be charging Frost Totem and Blank Slate. These feel like they are viewed as Mac items and got nerfed with the Mac items, and they feel completely unplayable anywhere else and not even clearly good in Mac. And again, like, I'm not that sad about it, but it does stand out to me that it feels over nerfed, and I don't really understand where these are meant to be used now. Moving on to the Ice Watch Warden, it's the one that got the best changes by far, because like I was saying with these other 2, they feel like they're dedicated Mac items that were good because they were in a busted build that already got gutted, and then they got gutted on top of it, making them even more useless for anyone else. Ice Watch Warden got the complete opposite change. Sure, 8 seconds freeze for half a second's a bad active, but it no longer only charges adjacent relics, it charges adjacent items, meaning any status spam build can throw this in to accelerate themselves now, and it's not like specifically a Mac thing, right? I feel like this is much more widely usable in other builds than it used to be. I can imagine some pretty cool stuff happening in like a Nitro Hammer Dooley with this now. This is just a good change. I don't know that it needed the freeze nerf because like it wasn't ever that fast out of Relic Mac, which got gutted. But again, like we've been over that. We talked about that enough. I'm gonna stop bringing it up every time there's a change. But yeah, I really like this change. I want to see the other relics in the temple be more useful for other characters. I don't want to see them stay the same and get weaker because they're in a broken archetype for Mac. when it feels like no one else has a use for them, and they're just there to dilute the pool so you don't always get Obsidian enchant when you're playing anyone but Mac. Next up, Stinger's cooldown's been changed to 7 seconds, and it's now slow 1, 2, 3, 4 for 1. I don't know how the base damage compares, but that basically makes it a neutral lifesteal grappling hook, which is certainly a lot better than the garbage it's been until now. Not really like a great item I'm looking to put on my board, but certainly a lot more playable than it was, and might actually see a place on a lot of boards now. And Small Refresh has been changed back to its old functionality, which is honestly probably fine. It's still weird that it's unlimited, unlike most early game monster skills. Usually the unlimited stuff is like a late game diamond skill, like the stuff from Void Colossus. But at the same time, this was only super broken because it specifically broke the old purge mechanics, right? With the new purge mechanics, it's purge 1 poison on anything but diamond and 2 at diamond, right? Because it rounds up. Actually, no, at 20, it's exactly even. It doesn't round anywhere. So it's just always purge 1. So it doesn't break any of the new purge mechanics like it did the old ones. So it's probably fine to go back down. But mostly what this patch is about is entirely this section right here. The massive gutting nerfs to Freeze Mac. I think they went too far. I eagerly await a future where people are okay with Freeze Mac existing and these cards having numbers that don't look like just a steaming pile of shit at first glance. But if the goal was to get Freeze Mac out of the meta and let the meta breathe, mission accomplished. Hopefully they can come back up in some capacity once we establish that this is awful, because I really cannot believe that these balance numbers result in Frost Totem blank slate builds being remotely playable. I imagine anyone who was mid-run when this went live lost their run immediately, unless they had like the most cracked pendulum setup of all time. Anyways, how's my opinion on this patch? Well, first I actually want to talk about the previous patch a second. I'm probably going to mention this more in my review for the current meta, but the previous patch was one of those times when I think a lot of people felt the game was pay to win. Where like if every new season had the balance that launch weekend did for season 3, free-to-play players would not be able to buy every set with gems. They would not be able to compete in the opening weekends, and it would feel pay to win. I don't think it was through any intent of the developers. They were obviously fixing other things, but the balance in season 3's opening weekend was rough to say the least. Everything other than the builds relying on the 2 new sets felt like it was playing a different game. Now, despite that, I actually do really think that the previous hotfix we saw was some of the best patch notes we've ever gotten. And that's because I largely view patch notes to be less specifically about game balance and more specifically about changing mechanics of the game. Despite the game being officially launched, the game is constantly evolving. It isn't really set in stone yet. And the previous patch notes, I think, had a ton of great systematic changes that are great for the long-term health of the game. I'm not overly concerned with numbers unless something's wildly out of line. It's why last patch notes, when we saw the opposite changes and these got buffed, I was like, dude, I don't know about that. And with these, I keep harping on like, oh, this is still too far in the other direction. I'll draw attention to stuff when it's wildly out of line, but mostly numerical changes, not like the biggest deal to me. So I'm not like crazy hyped about this patch. I'm not like, oh yeah, the balance is perfect now. But I will say my overarching opinion for this patch is the game's a whole hell of a lot less pay to win in its current state. The meta's a whole lot more fun in its current state. I have issues with the new balance of Freeze Mac looking way too weak. Maybe play will reveal I'm wrong about that. But this is definitely a better meta than the one we were in just now, because it basically can't be a worse one because of how overtuned Freeze Mac was. And despite how bad that previous meta was, I stand by calling the previous patch fantastic. It's just that I say it from the point of like long-term game health and not really caring if there's a weekend where the only deck I'm playing is Freeze Mac. The point of this whole rambling diatribe, though, was that my opinion on this patch is that I'm glad Freeze Mac is dead. There is no valuable learning to be done in a meta where Freeze Mac was this dominant, so by killing Freeze Mac, the game opens up and we can explore other things, and the game's more interesting and more fun, and the meta's infinitely more diverse. But I'm also not super hyped about the patch because it's really just fixing a glaring issue in the meta, and the way it did so is less elegant and more take it out back behind the shed. But despite that, I do think it's going to be a massive improvement to the game. It's just not the kind of improvement that I'm going to be particularly enthusiastic about. Anyways, good luck out there. I'm sure we can all breathe a collective sigh of relief that we don't have to worry about queuing into Freeze Mac every single time past like day 7 now. The meta's going to be a lot more fun. The endgame's going to be a little bit less volatile. Looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. I'll see you out there in the Bazaar. Peace.